The Kithara's crystalline body pulsed with fading aurora colors as it collapsed at the edge of New Kepler Research Station. Dr. Sarah Chen watched through the reinforced viewport, her breath fogging the glass as the massive creature, easily, the size of a transport shuttle, dragged itself across the rocky terrain with what seemed like desperate purpose. "Sarah, step away from the window," Commander Torres ordered, his voice tight with concern. "We don't know what that thing is capable of." For 6 months, humanity had tried everything to communicate with the Kithara: radio signals, mathematical sequences, even primitive pictographs, all met with complete silence. The crystalline beings simply drifted through space in their bioships, occasionally landing on uninhabited worlds but never responding to contact attempts. This was the first time one had approached a human settlement. "It's dying," Sarah whispered, watching the creature's light dim. As the station's xenobiologist, she'd studied every scrap of data about these mysterious beings. Their bodies seemed to be living crystal, powered by some form of bioluminescence that created breathtaking displays of color, but this one's light was failing. Against all protocols, Sarah grabbed her environmental suit and headed for the airlock. "Dr. Chen, I order you to stand down," Torres shouted, but she was already cycling through decontamination. The Kithara's massive head turned toward her as she approached, and Sarah gasped. Its eyes weren't the simple photoreceptors they'd theorized. They were deep, multifaceted things that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. But more shocking was the unmistakable emotion she saw there: hope. With its final strength, the creature pushed 3 small, gem-like pods toward her feet. Each pod glowed with soft, swirling light, miniature versions of the parent's aurora, patterns. Sarah knelt and carefully gathered them in her arms, and the moment her skin made contact with the first pod, the world exploded into sensation. Suddenly she was soaring through space, feeling the loneliness of eons. She experienced the weight of carrying precious cargo across impossible distances, driven by love so fierce it transcended species. The dying Kithara wasn't just giving her its offspring, it was entrusting her with the future of its kind. The medical bay erupted in chaos as Sarah collapsed. The 3 Kithara pods still clutched against her chest. Dr. Marcus Webb, the station's chief medical officer, ran every scan he could think of while Commander Torres paced frantically. "Neural activity is off the charts," Webb reported, his voice edged with disbelief. "It's like her brain is processing information at 10 times normal capacity. But she's not seizing. If anything, her vital signs are remarkably stable." Sarah floated in a sea of alien memories. She experienced the Kithara, homeworld, a place of crystalline forests and empathic rivers where emotions flowed as freely as water. The entire species existed as a vast network of consciousness, sharing feelings, thoughts, and experiences across their world, like a living internet of souls. But then came the darkness. War erupted between different philosophical factions of their species. Unlike human conflicts fought with weapons, this was a war of emotions. Waves of hatred, despair, and rage that crashed through their empathic network like tsunamis. Environmental collapse followed as their psychic pollution began killing the very planet they shared consciousness with. "She's coming around," Webb announced as Sarah's eyes fluttered open. But when she looked at the people surrounding her, everything had changed. She could feel Torres's barely controlled fear, Webb's scientific fascination mixed with deep concern, and something else, the profound loneliness that each human carried, invisible walls they'd built around their hearts. "They're not just aliens," Sarah whispered, struggling to sit up. The pods in her arms pulsed gently, and she realized she could sense their simple, trusting thoughts. "They're refugees. Their entire species fled their world because they couldn't bear the pain anymore." She tried to explain what she'd experienced, but words felt clumsy after the pure communication she'd shared with the dying Kithara. "They feel everything. every emotion, every hurt, every joy. Their world became so full of trauma and psychic pain that living there was agony. They've been searching for a place to heal. As she spoke, something unprecedented happened. The three young Kithara began to glow brighter, and everyone in the medical bay suddenly felt a wave of inexplicable peace wash over them. Torres's constant anxiety about protecting the station faded. Webb's chronic insomnia, a result of losing patience early in his career, simply evaporated. "What's happening to us?" Torres asked, his voice filled with wonder rather than fear, for the first time since Sarah had known him. Within days, word spread throughout New Kepler Research Station about the extraordinary effects of the young Kithara. Sarah had become their unofficial guardian, and wherever she carried them, miracles seemed to follow. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, who'd been struggling with severe PTSD from a mining accident that killed 3 of his team, found himself sleeping peacefully for the first time in months after a brief encounter with the pods. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's chief psychologist, was fascinated and concerned in equal measure. "We need to understand what's happening," she told Sarah as they observed the young Kithara in the makeshift nursery they'd created. "These aren't random mood improvements. They're targeting specific traumas with surgical precision." Sarah watched. As the pods pulsed in synchronization, their lights creating complex patterns that seemed almost like a language. Through her bond with them, she could sense their simple but profound purpose. They were healers, naturally drawn to emotional pain like antibodies responding to infection. "It's not just healing," Sarah realized. "They're learning from us. Every trauma they encounter teaches them more about human psychology." The breakthrough came when Chief Engineer Alexei Kozlov arrived for his scheduled maintenance check. Kozlov was notorious for his explosive temper and his bitter resentment toward Dr. Patricia Lawson, the quantum physicist whose theoretical errors had led to his brother's death in an experimental reactor failure years earlier. The two hadn't spoken civilly in the entire time they'd served together. As Kozlov entered the nursery, one of the young Kithara suddenly blazed with intense light. Sarah felt the pod's shock as it encountered not just Kozlov's rage, but the deep, festering guilt he carried. Guilt over failing to check his brother's calculations personally. Guilt over surviving when his sibling didn't. But then the most extraordinary thing happened. Through the empathic link, the young Kithara showed Kozlov something impossible. Patricia Lawson's own memories of that day. Her desperate attempts to save his brother, her years of self-blame, her secret visits to his grave where she left flowers, and whispered apologies. Both humans stood frozen as the alien young shared their hidden pain with each other. Then, for the first time in 3 years, Kozlov and Lawson looked directly at each other and saw not enemies, but fellow sufferers carrying the same burden of loss. The young Kithara had done something their parent species had lost the ability to do. They'd transformed pain into understanding, trauma into connection. 3 weeks after the first Kithara's death, more of their bioships appeared in New Kepler's system. But these weren't refugees. They were scouts, investigating what had happened to their fallen colleague and its offspring, the massive crystalline. Vessels hung in space like floating cathedrals, beautiful and utterly alien. "They're scanning us," reported Communications Officer Lisa Park, her voice tight with tension. "But it's not technological. It's something else. I can feel them, touching my thoughts." Sarah stood in the observation deck, cradling the 3. Young Kithara, who had grown noticeably larger and brighter in their time at the station. Through her bond with them, she could sense the adult Kithara's confusion and wariness. The parent ships had expected to find their young dead or suffering among the emotionally primitive humans. Instead, they found them thriving and actively, healing the very species they'd been entrusted to. Commander Torres joined her at the viewport. The gruff military officer had been transformed by his exposure to the young Kithara, his chronic anxiety replaced by a calm confidence that made him a better leader than he'd ever been. "What do they want, Sarah?" "They're trying to understand," she replied, feeling the alien minds probing carefully at the edges of human consciousness. "Their species has forgotten how to heal trauma instead of just avoiding it. They've been running from their pain for so long that they've lost the ability to process it." The adult Kithara were experiencing something unprecedented through the young ones. Humans who could suffer terribly but still choose love over hatred, hope over despair. They saw Lieutenant Morrison return to duty, not broken by his trauma, but strengthened by overcoming it. They witnessed Kozlov and Lawson not just reconcile but become the station's most effective team. Their shared loss transformed into shared purpose. But the most shocking revelation came when the adult Kithara realized the true extent of human emotional resilience. Through the young ones' healing work, they discovered that humans possessed something the Kithara had lost during their flight from their homeworld: the ability to alchemize suffering into wisdom, to transform wounds into sources of strength. The lead ship moved closer, and Sarah felt a presence touch her mind. Ancient, weary, but curious. Through the connection, she understood their dilemma. The Kithara had the power to heal trauma, but they'd never learned to grow from it. Humans had the opposite gift. They could transform pain into purpose, but often lacked the ability to heal cleanly. "They want to learn from us," Sarah whispered, in amazement. "They want to remember how to be brave enough to feel pain without running from it." 6 months later, New Kepler Research Station had been transformed into something unprecedented in human history: a joint species healing center. The Kithara had not only remained, but had begun the slow process of sharing their abilities with carefully selected humans while learning the art of emotional resilience from their new partners. Sarah Chen stood in the expanded observation deck, watching as human patients worked alongside Kithara healers in the bioluminescent therapy gardens they'd grown together. The young Kithara she'd first rescued were now adolescents, their crystalline forms reaching her waist, their empathic abilities refined by months of learning human emotional complexity. "The trauma survivors make the best healers," she explained to the documentary crew that had arrived from Earth. "They understand suffering in a way that pure empaths can't. The Kithara are teaching us to heal cleanly, while we're teaching them that pain survived can become strength shared." Lieutenant Morrison now led a program for veterans struggling with PTSD, working with a Kithara partner who had learned to not just absorb trauma, but to help transform it into post-traumatic growth. Dr. Lawson and Chief Kozlov had become the station's most requested counseling team, their own journey from hatred to healing, serving as proof that reconciliation was possible. But the most stunning development was the emergence of hybrid healing techniques. Young humans exposed to Kithara empathy from childhood were developing enhanced emotional intelligence, while young Kithara raised among humans were learning to channel their species' flight instincts into courage. "We're not becoming the same species," Sarah continued, watching as a human child and a young Kithara played together, their different forms of consciousness creating something entirely new. "We're becoming something better than either species could be alone." The adult Kithara had made their decision not just to stay, but to call their scattered refugee fleets to this small corner of space. Earth had become their new homeworld, not because it was safe from pain, but because humanity had shown them that pain shared and transformed could become the foundation for something beautiful. The alliance between the species was growing, ship by ship, healing by healing. Word was spreading through both human space and the Kithara refugee networks. There was a place where trauma could become wisdom, where ancient wounds could be transformed into new strength, and where two very different forms of consciousness had learned to heal each other. As Sarah watched the sunset paint the station in warm colors that rivaled the Kithara's natural luminescence, she reflected on the dying alien's final gift. Entrusting humanity with its young, the Kithara had saved not just their species, but had given both civilizations the chance to become something neither could have imagined alone. True healers in a galaxy that desperately needed healing.